Welcome to Shop Talk Live 248, our very first, as far as I'm aware, best of episode. Thank you to everyone who sent in your suggestions. It was really interesting, honestly interesting to see the segments that have stuck with the listeners of Shop Talk Live throughout all these years. Most of these will come from one particular time period because that's what we have available on the hard drives. There were some requests for like episode 22 or whatever. That would have required some unearthing of files that, thanks to working from home, we're unable to do right now. But this is a really interesting array of topics covered. And I just really want to shout out to Jeff Rose, who's always a superstar for all of the franchises here at Taunton. Thanks, Jeff, for making this one possible. All right, without further ado, Shop Talk Live's Greatest Hits, Part 1. There's a reason why Pony Jorgensen is tight with woodworkers. Their clamps are made using only the highest quality of materials, and they inspect each one to guarantee consistency and performance. That's what they mean when they say clamps without compromise. Head on over to ponyjorgensen.com to explore their wide range of pipe clamp fixtures, bar clamps, hand clamps, and more. And join their woodworking community on Instagram by following them at pony_Jorgensen. So this segment is an interesting one. 3 people requested from Shop Talk Live 179 back in 2018, Barry's discussion about off-brand hand planes and finding that diamond in the rough at the flea market. So there must be a lot of people out there with a similar mindset, and people dug it. Here it is. First question is from Tony. We hear so much talk about Lee Nielsen Veritas and Stanley hand planes, but I have a Miller's Fall number 8 that I picked up from an antique store that works really well. I don't think I've ever heard the name Miller's Falls mentioned on the podcast, so I'm wondering if they are any good. Well, it works really well. They seem to have been in contention with Stanley, and they are American-made from New England, no less, since 1868. New England pride.
So I'm all on board with the Miller's Fall. When somebody says get an old Stanley, I hear get an old plane. It's not necessarily only Stanley.
This is true. There's a lot of plane manufacturers going on at that time because people were actually making a living with their hand planes.
Right. Yeah. So pre-World War II, you can expect better quality than...
I think so.
Yeah.
Your stable of planes is... Eclectic. It's pretty eclectic. That's a good... I was going to say a mutt.
So I have a Craftsman, and I got it for $15 or $25, so no money, really.
Of that same era?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I borrow $15?
And it's probably made by Miller's Falls. So there's this cool website hosted by Don Willwall called Time Tested Tools. And he goes through and he has these different like stamps put on the plane. Like, if it is this, it was made by Sargent. If it was this, it was made by Miller's Falls.
Oh, cool.
So mine is kind of like a Miller's Falls stamp, but regardless, it's a really nice plane.
Yeah.
It has never acted up on me. There's some backlash in the wheel adjustment, and the lateral adjustment isn't incredibly tight, but
yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean $15-$25, and it shaves really nicely.
Yeah.
So
that wasn't the plane you were using when you posted that picture of that, as you called chunk out.
No, what was I using? I was using an intermediate scrub plane, kind of a heavily cambered jack plane.
Yeah.
Wait.
I almost replied to you, I don't know why you got tear out. The grain is so straight and your shavings are so thin.
Wait, hold on. You saw that post?
Yes, I did.
Did you like it?
I'm sure I did.
No, you didn't. You ended
Yes,
like
I
one of
did.
my posts and like 3 posts.
I liked it. I loved that post, actually. Yes.
That's like the fine woodworking office equivalent of spitting in his face.
Right. No, okay. So that board is way over long, and there was a knot there. I'm like, I'm just gonna go through it. You know.
Getting back to the question at hand.
So
You're not afraid of any manufacturers.
No, I mean, especially if it's pre.
But how do you know? How do you know? Are you that guy who like sits there on the phone looking up
No, so
serial numbers and stuff at the flea market?
no. For that plane, I mean, you can look at tote size. That plane, I lucked out. To be totally honest, I lucked out. I did bring a ruler to the flea market, antique store where I bought it to check.
They must have loved that.
Yeah.
Hey,
what
man,
are
they
you
mocked
doing?
me later. I became a regular. Like, what were you doing with that ruler? To check, like, to see if the blade was bellied on the back. And I did scope out the cap iron, but I lucked out. What to look for? I know the tote, like squattier front knobs are a sign of pre-World War II, but I'm not really up on my scoping out a plane.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's whether it's a Stanley or any other brand, you're looking for pieces that aren't missing.
Okay.
A plane that isn't obviously been cannibalized and you see parts from a bunch of other planes. You want to make sure there's no cracks in the casting. And for an off-brand plane that may be difficult to get an aftermarket iron for it, take a look at the iron. It doesn't matter if it's all like ground and rounded over. Just look at the back of the iron and make sure it's not really pitted with rust, because if there's any pits, you can't get it sharp. But I think Hawk sells blades, I think for different manufacturers of old hand planes. I'm not sure.
He might have. Jeff is saying he does.
But yeah, I
There you
mean,
go.
Miller's Falls, you mentioned Craftsman, Sargent, I think you mentioned that as well. There's a lot of, I think you can just sort of kind of tell by looking at it, whether it's an old plane or if it's if it's got plastic handles. Nah.
Have you seen the Miller's Falls, the Buck Rogers ones?
I've seen it.
The Roy Underhill.
I think
the
like-
outro of the Roy Underhill.
Yeah, and he really digs it. So that's my one exception to plastic
yes,
handles.
that
But
one.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was plastic or Bakelite. I'm not sure.
Bakelite. Yeah, you're right. It's
That'd be cool.
Bakelite.
But yeah, I mean, that, even if it doesn't work well, and I think Roy sort of confessed that it may not take the finest shaving of any hand plane he has, but I can understand how that would be your favorite hand plane. Absolutely.
All right. Question number 2 from Matt. I have been wanting to do a project using Drawbore mortise and tenon joints.
Yeah. What?
I like that. That was good enthusiasm. Right out the gate.
Is it a bad idea to attempt this joint in softer woods like cherry or walnut rather than oak?
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I would say no.
Yeah.
I drawboard my kitchen table, and that's pine and some poplar, but pine, and that was
You have a
fine.
mutt of a kitchen table too.
Yeah, it's painted.
Yeah.
The pine base is painted.
Is there anything that you do differently in softer woods?
If anything, I think there's more wiggle room because I work in, obviously I work in white oak quite a bit. And in fact, I was just making a little shop stool and with the Drawbore joinery. And basically, you're offsetting the holes in the mortise and the tenon. So as you drive them together, it actually pulls everything tight, which is really, really cool. It's a self-clamping joint. Where you run into trouble is if your offsets are too much. Things can break. The pin can sort of snap off. So I would say in softer woods, relatively speaking, cherry and walnut, you can probably, I think there's more leeway in terms of the amount of the variation in your offsets, and you can still get by because there's a little bit more compressive nature of those woods. Whereas I think the harder the wood, just like when you're fitting joinery, if it's really, really hard wood and there's no compression at all, you've got to be like dead on. So if anything, I don't think it's an issue. I'm going to say no.
I had nothing. My note was a larger offset, but it's probably not even a concern at furniture scale. It's like a skinny 64th, It's like,
Right.
So,
Just see that little skinny crescent when you put them together. And
Yeah.
that's good. You see like a half moon? No, that's bad.
Do you ever use, like, say you're doing, not even for aesthetic reasons, do you ever use oak pins on a walnut piece, or are you always using the species that's for the pin?
I think that's a really good idea in that even if it's, I think you need to be using a harder wood for pin. So I always typically use kind of a variation on ribbon oak, meaning I use kiln-dried stock. I'll find stuff with pretty straight grain. I'll take a short board, maybe 8 inches long, and just hit the end grain with my axe and split it so that's going straight with the grain, and then I'll just hand plane along that, and then just bandsaw all my little pins off of that axis. So basically, you want straight grain is really, really important. So yeah, I mean, if you want like a contrasting wood, like if you don't want to use oak on everything, I've used like rosewood pins on.
He has an axe. We haven't said anything about that yet, but he has an axe.
On a flame birch little table I made. I think I started off with, I don't know what I started off with, but I ended up using with the contrasting woods. It should be pretty tough, and it should be along the grain lines.
I pulled up Lada's drawboring article that he did, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
And that was the only tip regarding species, was if I'm using a really soft wood like pine, I'm going to grab a maple peg. And I think there was just so there wasn't so much color contrast, but he said he's definitely going harder. So,
Chris Gochner in the Enfield cupboard it was a cherry cupboard and used cherry drawbar pins. But when he would do the dry fitting and everything, and he would drawbore it with cherry, he would take those pins out and throw them away.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It was like single use.
Yeah.
It's not even worth trying to reuse them.
Yeah.
Just make new pins.
The other cool thing about that style of joinery is, as I mentioned, I was making my shop stool, and I was sort of kind of refining the design as I was building. And what's really cool is with the drawbore joinery, you can just tack them in place, just get them started to pull the joint tight, and you can do all your dry fitting. Like I had to dry fit the base in order to measure for a stretcher between the lower rails and that kind of stuff. You just tack it together and it holds really, really tight, but then you just pop them back out and you can pull it back apart. So
you don't even bother with drawbore pins. Those like big taper metal thingies. The face you're making is saying no.
Oh, that tool that allows you to align.
It looks like what you use to like sharpen a kitchen knife, like one of those. Yeah,
I know. That was probably that was a very important learning experience for me. I was demonstrating at a Lee Nielsen show in Mystic Seaport, which was really cool, which is neither here nor there. But someone came up and he was holding this Lee Nielsen little pointy stick for aligning drawbore holes. He says, "Oh, do I need this?" I said, "No." And he was like so crushed and so depressed. It's like, he just wanted someone to say, yeah, you need that.
It's a cool looking tool.
So I learned that lesson. So of course you need one of those, Barry.
When you made your stool, there's bridle joints that you're drawboring.
Yeah.
Are you offsetting those holes? So basically that bridle joint, you want it to pull tight in two directions.
Yeah.
Are you offsetting those holes in both directions? Diagonally?
If you reference my little sewing table article with the bridle joint at the top, I did speak specifically about offsetting at an angle. So I'm a little steamed at this point in time.
I think he was trying to lead you on. He was baiting
trying to give the listener more information.
Here's the thing, though. It's every time I do it, I have to figure it out because I know, just going straight into like a regular tenon, I know if I, mark a little center point, dry fit the joint, mark the center point, pull it apart, I make a new center point just a hair in toward the shoulder. And that's good. So I'm thinking, so I'm pulling this bridle joint at a diagonal. So I'm going to go a hair into the shoulder and then a hair down. And it's like, no, that pulls it to the shoulder, but then up away from the bottom of the bridle joint. Because I did it once and you pound it through and there was a little gap.
Oh, yeah, I just did that in my head.
Yeah, and I said, that was weird, but maybe I just got it wrong. So then I did the second one and boop, it came up too. It's like, what is going on? So it's a little counterintuitive, but going into the shoulder of the tenon, you go toward the shoulder, but the bridle, you go up away from the bridle. So I have to refigure out every time. And the last time I tried it, I guessed wrong. So now I don't care and I just go straight into the joint.
Do you ever did you have to remake that piece? Maybe.
Yeah, I did. So I pulled it back out. I drilled out that whole oversize. I plugged it, and then I fit it back in and remarked it. So, yeah, that was a bummer.
How is it pounded out a draw? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I was drinking. You pounded out the peg?
Yeah.
Or drilled? Okay. What is that like?
Usually it's not too bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something that I just am terrified.
Because I typically don't glue the pins, and I'll glue like the mortise and tenon of a joint, but I don't put glue on the pin or in the little hole of the pin because it just holds itself.
Yeah.
From Shop Talk Live 185 back in 2019, here is Mike Pekovich and I reading The Mind of Bob Van Dyke.
All right. Well, I think it is time for our all-time favorite tool of all time for this week. Who wants to go first?
What you got, Bob?
Yeah, I was, thinking about that last night, trying to figure it out. And it's kind of boring, but my favorite tool, the one that
Wait. Can we each take a guess at where this is going? Is number 4.
I was going to say number 4 hand plane.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll just go home then. You don't need me.
You have a bond with your number 4. That's all we're going to say.
Well, I was thinking about other tools. And, yeah, other tools are cool that I've used. And, yeah, that's kind of cool. That's nice. I was thinking, router plane. And then I was trying to think, well, I could really make people crazy and just come up with a power tool that was my favorite, but oh my God.
I've mentioned the rigid trim router in the past.
The trim router, yeah. It's amazing how good that is. It runs circles around any other trim router. But the other favorite tools are just kind of like they do one thing, and that's all they do. And in the number 4 is so useful, and so I can do anything with it. It's
except playing quarters on stock.
Yeah, not as well. Yeah, or you'd have to go across the grain. But it's just, there's so much, and it's such a nice tool to be using. It's such a nice size. Like, I particularly like the old, I have it's an old, I think it's a Type 11. I think they were made around 1910, 1915, something like that. It was right before the high knob on the Stanley planes came into being.
Okay.
And the high knob is when, the high knob to me is wrong because it encourages you to hold the plane incorrectly. And I see that all the time. Where the low knob doesn't, it kind of makes you hold it correctly. And I like it. I like that plane because it feels good. It's looser. I have a Lee Nielsen number 4, and in the school I have a number of them, and they're excellent planes. But the feel of them is different. It's much tighter, and it just kind of feels better in my hand.
That's only a good description if you've used both of them, but you're absolutely right. It is, a Lee Nielsen is tighter, and a Stanley is just worn in, looser.
Maybe it's a thinner blade. Maybe it's, I know what you mean, and it's not loose in a bad way.
No. Normally that would be a bad connotation.
Yeah. It's just, to me, it's easier to adjust. I can adjust it much more precisely. Then, because the Lee Nielsen is, even after years of use, it's tighter. It's a better made plane. It clearly is, but it's a tighter, and it's just not as, I don't know, it's not as easy. It doesn't feel as good in my hands. You're one of those people. I think I've seen you open up your tool cabinet, pull out
your old Stanley number 4 and put it on your bench to do nothing that has to do with hand planing. It was just the fact that it wasn't on your bench and you're left uncomfortable by that. It was like, I'm going to show you how to use a marking gauge. Where's my number 4? Oh,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, there you go. Well, and it's funny. I thought you were going with this, the traditional way of transferring dovetails.
Oh, yeah.
If you're cutting the tails first, you hold your number 4 on its side, and the pin board is parallel to the side of it, and you hold the two together, and you put your pin board in the vise, and then you slide your the hand plane back, and that holds the other end of the tailboard as you're transferring.
Yeah.
Mike came up with a transfer device.
It's a very complicated piece of wood.
It is, and it's quite well. We've actually figured out other things that it can do.
I'm now calling it the number 4 flip lock.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, it's the flipper block, but it's also a saddle square. And so
a little saw hook,
yeah, a little, and a very little bench hook.
a square saddle square scribe,
Yeah.
a vertical alignment jig.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a system.
You keep this up, and Woodpecker's going to make a red one and start selling it.
Yeah. A one-time tool.
All right. I think we have fully covered the number 4
Yeah, we
in
have.
Bob's infatuation.
we haven't even scratched the surface in number
Bob's
4.
Exactly.
Do you want to go next?
Sure. I was in a weird thing place where I'm going to be demonstrating down in Alabama, so I had to UPS a bunch of
Did you
tools
just call
down there.
Alabama a weird place?
No.
And is he going to say that the crates that he made are his favorite?
Oh,
Not this time around. But I had a weekend class coming up at Bob's. We were doing the first weekend of a wall cabinet class. So it was a thing where I had to ship some tools for a class in Alabama before I did Bob's class. So it was this thing where, what do I want to ship? What do I want to keep here for this class? And the idea is I have more than enough tools to actually have 2 complete sets where I can ship one set to Alabama, keep one here for teaching. However, there was a very small number of tools where it's like, I don't want to be without this for either class. And the one that sticks out the most is my 6-inch combination square, steric combination square. It's like, I'm not shipping this down there. I need this. I will just check some baggage. I decided that one tool convinced me to just when you go to Alabama, just check a bag and throw a bunch of tools in there that you don't want to do without. But that was all precipitated by the fact that I did not want to do without my number 6 combo square for like either class.
I can see Mike trying to get through TSA. I don't know if I trust it,
Yeah.
and then he's put in his carry-on luggage instead. And
Yeah. I've embedded that into my laptop. There's a secret compartment. So, yeah, it's just one of those
They'll
tools.
find it.
It's in the center pocket of my apron. It always lives there. I use that probably 95% of the time I'm using a combination square. It's that one as opposed to the 12-inch, the bigger one.
Yeah.
So that would be it. I like that.
Speaking of trying to sneak stuff through TSA, I got stopped on the way. I was going out to LA. I got stopped and pulled aside, and I'm kind of used to getting pulled aside because I look like somebody that you would pull aside.
I would every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
In fact, I wouldn't even let you pull it aside. I'd just put it say, I'm sorry, no.
we'll just leave. But they grabbed my bag, and I was normally they're patting me down, and they're going through my bag, and he's really rooting through my bag. I'm going, what is going on here? And we have this storeroom downstairs. It's like the land of leftover office staplers and stuff like that. And I was down there looking for like a binder one day, and I found like a trunk lid stay, like a solid brass trunk lid stay. It was really nice. I'm like, I'm taking this, And I stuck it in my bag. And the TSA guy is rooting through, and he pulls out what looks like
A big old switch.
just a big old pipe that somebody would bring onto a plane to do something bad with. And I was like, he goes, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh man, I'm a woodworker, and that's a piece of hardware. I'm so sorry. Just throw it out, please." You know, and it's just like one of those. They caught me. But
Couple years ago, TSA. A couple years ago, a friend of mine. It's a luthier up in Massachusetts, and he was saying, I'm going down to Sanibel Island in a couple months, and they have the sugar sand there, which is perfect for sand shading. It's the best sand you can get for sand shading.
This is officially the dorkiest conversation that's ever been on the podcast.
So I said, yeah, of course, bring some back. So he about a couple of weeks after he come back, he drops off this big baggie of sand. It's got some shells and little bit of shells, but mostly sand. And he gives it to me. He goes, "You should have seen TSA when I brought this through. It was a little dicey."
And for the record, there was no air quote for the listeners. There was no air quotes that entire conversation. He really was talking about sand.
What the hell?
A few people requested any conversation from episode 214.5, the one with no questions. This is early pandemic days. The video is pretty rough and the audio is not much better. It is just basically Barry, Anissa, and I yammering on. But we pulled out a conversation we think you'll dig. I have one discussion that I wanted to ask you guys, because I feel like this trio is the best trio to answer this. What?
There goes Bongo.
Bongo.
Yeah. I saw something move over there. What do you think that people like Chris Bexford and Tim Rousseau and Bob Van Dyke and Chris Schwartz and all of these awesome people that we work with, do you think they're superhuman?
They're superhuman?
Well, like I think a lot of people think they are otherworldly woodworkers and super, super talented and skilled, and they are. But they still make the mistakes that most other people make, and they're just able to recover from them. And you see them. Our job is weird because we get to see these people make dumb mistakes, and say, "Oh, yeah, okay, that happens to everyone. They're just better at recovering or something."
I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast before, but I was working with Will Neptune in Bob Van Dyke's shop.
Yeah.
Will used to be the head of the cabinet and furniture making program at North Bennett. He's a cartouche winner. He's
well qualified.
Yeah, like the dude's fantastic. We're doing, dovetail dividers. And so it's these dividers that are dadoed into cases, and at the front they have a little short dovetail. And Will was doing 4 different variations. After you route the dado and make the dovetail, you cut the slot with a saw, or he does it with a saw and chisel and the router plane. And he nailed one. Like, after sawing and he got it on the first try, which I was fully expecting. Like, this is what Will Neptune does. He calls over Bob. Bob, check this out. Yo, I nailed this dovetail. Check this out. What is going on? And I couldn't even contain myself. I squinted. I'm like, "You're Will Neptune. You're calling over Bob Van Dyke. What is this strange alternate universe?" And Will said, he says, "What's the point of doing it if you're not going to get excited by it?" I'm like,
that's a good point.
Absolutely fair. And so that, I don't know if that made him more or less superhuman. The fact that he remains excited about nailing a single dovetail for an article, like the rest of the carcass was screwed together, but he was pretty stoked.
What do you think, Anissa?
Do I think I don't know. We've talked about this question, I think, in a couple different meetings, and I think we may have framed it as I remember like one big, not just fine woodworking staff, but one of those meetings where everybody was in. We talked about, is the master craftsman the person who doesn't make any mistakes, or is he or she the person who just recovers from their mistakes quickly? Maybe both. Maybe it's both. Maybe they are super duper woodworkers and they are just able to take all that experience and they make fewer mistakes maybe, but they still make them. And when they do make them, they're just like, I know how to fix that. And they move on. So maybe it's a combination of both of those things. They have way more history and mileage and experience, so they make fewer mistakes, but they can also really recover from them and not get fazed by them.
When was the last time either of you made a mistake and freaked out? Or like, I can't fix it. Or like wanted to throw the piece against the wall. Like
this is I think what I should have posed. Because that is a much better representation of what I've gleaned from the people that we work with. Is that they make the mistake, but they just do it with style. You know? it's
falling with style.
Like, I don't think the last time I made a mistake that it was just like, this is done, this is stupid. It was before this job, I think, because you see so much experience and so much work that goes into these beautiful pieces by our authors that, oh crap, this isn't an unattainable thing. And maybe it's just the fact that if you watch a phenomenal guitar player, you're just watching the performance. You're not watching all of the years and hours practicing, right? We get to watch the practice too. We don't just see the end results.
Mm-hmm.
We see some of the repetitions. And ever since then, it's like before I was talking about how I'm screwing up this one thing, but I feel like every time I screw it up, I learn more and I get closer to the final goal of being able to produce these efficiently. And it's because I sit there and think like, oh yeah, Tim Rousseau has probably wandered down this path before too,
Go on, Anissa.
No, go ahead, Barry.
On this table that I'm doing, my brother.
I'm beating you at Words with Friends. You go first.
I'm winning by like 30 points. This is a what have you done for me lately environment, Anissa.
This game, you might be ahead a little bit.
My brother wanted breadboard ends. Like, come on, fine. So we'll do breadboard ends. And I was drawboring them, and it's 5 pegs per end. And a weird thing was happening where the peg was splitting at some point. So on the exit side, 2 prongs would come out. And it didn't come out as a single peg, so it came out like a little 2-prong fork. And that was maddening. And I was more frustrated, and not that I'm Chris Becksford, but it felt good that I was more annoyed by the mistake being made. Like, yeah, I can fix it, or I can handle this. And it feels good when I'm more annoyed that I made the mistake to begin with. Like, I can patch that, but stupid me for doing that in the first place.
Yeah.
And I like being able to pick on myself that way rather than like, oh, the table's ruined, Like,
yeah. Yeah, you're going to get through it. That's the difference.
So the other interesting thing that I've noticed watching people work over the years is, I'll go there and they know what they're going to be shooting and they'll have prep stuff. And they may have even prepped the stuff for me a couple weeks ago, but there's always a moment or a couple times during a shoot where somebody will say, oh, how did I do that?
I love that.
Even though they're whoever they are and they can do everything really well, when you're woodworking and you're doing it for a living and you're doing one project after another, that last project, that quickly goes to the back of your mind and you're on what you're doing right now. So you have to takes less time to rethink what you did and figure it out. But even if it's like, oh, right, let me take the 30 seconds and figure out how to do this, that plays into the past experience and into how quickly or how efficiently you work as well, because you have more to grab from in your arsenal. But
have either of you had an author go, how did I do that? What did I write?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Let me open the manuscript. But it's pretty fun because they have 100 different ways to do it in their heads. It's like, what did I write? Let me make sure we keep this consistent, so it makes sense.
Fine Woodworking is bringing our best instructors right to your home with our shop class webinars. With these virtual workshops, you can watch, listen, ask questions, and enjoy the chats and connections with other woodworkers and our experts. To find out more, go to finewoodworking.com/shopclass.
If I had a dime for every email that came in that said anything with Mike Michelli, I'd probably have $1.50 right now. From 223, Mike Michelli knows more about finishing than you do. Here is my favorite conversation from that episode.
Hi, guys. I've been listening to some old episodes in episode 59, which I have no recollection of whatsoever. Question was asked about comparing Danish oil and wiping varnish. One of the statements mentioned real varnish. I was wondering what real varnish means, and he enjoys the program immensely. So, so what is the difference between something branded Danish oil versus a wiping varnish?
Well, how much time do we have, Mike?
Yeah, really.
I'll try to do this, a shorter version of what I do in my class. The basis of most of the finishes that you guys are talking about, the oil finishes, is linseed oil. Linseed comes from the flax plant, which is what linen fabric is made from. And the little flax seeds, which are edible, it's a health food item. If you squish a whole bunch of flax seeds, you make flax or linseed oil.
Cool.
That's a natural oil. It's a plant product, and it will eventually dry on its own. If you encourage it by leaving it out in the sun or by boiling it, it'll dry a little faster. So it's a drying oil, but it's oil. So it absorbs into the wood to a certain extent, and it does not form a rigid, firm film. It's an oil. Think of olive oil, walnut oil, peanut oil. It's a natural oil. What happened a million years ago...
Which doesn't have the resins.
Right. So people who used oil finishes, which were very successful, shellac came from the Far East, mostly from India, and it came back over the trade routes, and shellac also is a natural product. It's a bug excrement, if you will, and it's solid at room temperature. So shellac flakes, as you've seen, it looks like corn flakes. They're solid at room temperature, and you dissolve them with a solvent, which is plain old alcohol. And the term for that in the finishing books is a spirit varnish. The spirit being alcohol, and the resin being the natural bug stuff.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But the bug stuff forms a film. So you take this stuff at room temperature as a flake, you melt it in some alcohol, you cast it out with a brush or a pad, and it dries and forms a film, and that film is hard. So that's a spirit varnish.
I mean, as the solvent evaporates out.
As the alcohol evaporates, it leaves the shellac film behind, and you have, as Bob says, so many layers of saran wrap.
Cool.
The oil, when it dries in a different way, and it doesn't leave a film. So if I can use a term, if you fortify the linseed oil with something that's a resin, you can make a varnish. And the resins that were available at the time in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance were natural products. So a resin would be pine sap. And if you take fresh pine sap, you can make rosin or colophony, and you melt that into your varnish with heat. So you're breaking the heat of the cooking of it, breaks down the resin. And now you've fortified that oil so it not only penetrates into the wood, but it also leaves a film. So you're making a resin varnish. And then some really smart person found these fossilized pieces of tree sap in various parts of the world, particularly in New Zealand and Australia, that were from ancient big pine trees like our big redwoods. And the famous one is copal, and it looks like a little rock candy rock, or like a piece of amber that, like when we were kids, the bug in an amber for the fossil. So there's this fossilized rock of tree sap. If you smash it up in a mortar and pestle, it makes dust. If you cook your linseed oil to a high temperature and you melt in some of this resin, you make varnish. And if you add in some other stuff like the spaghetti sauce, you can make the varnish more flexible, like a spar varnish where you'd put some castor oil in so it's more, it doesn't dry as quickly. Or you put in some other additives and you can make whatever you're going to make. And for the last 400 or 500 years, people have been experimenting with different resins in linseed oil to make various formulations that got a special name. McCloskey's spar varnish is a particular resin in a particular concoction of linseed oil. And what happens when you do that is it gets gummy and sticky, and you need something to make it brush out or flow out. And the original solvent was turpentine. That's what was available. Now we have synthetics. We have the chemicals like mineral spirits, or I greatly prefer naphtha. So you've got three components. You've got the oil, you've got the resin, and you've got some kind of a solvent. And you put that together and you make your product. So to answer the question that was asked here, there's no such thing as Danish oil. If you go to Denmark and ask them, they don't know what this is. There is no such thing. It's a trade name. Danish oil is basically skinny varnish. It's linseed oil with a resin and some solvent. And in the case of most like Watco, there's a whole lot of solvent. So it's relatively low resin content, high linseed oil content, and lots of thinner or solvent, and it's a skinny varnish. It leaves a thin film. And a real varnish, a true varnish, like a violin varnish or somebody else's varnish, is just another different manufacturer's formulation. Maybe it's got 2 or 3 different resins. Maybe it's got copal, Daymar, or nowadays some artificial resins. And
so
if I can just
phenolic or polyurethane.
Well, for those of us of a certain age, if you remember your grandmother's telephone, those big heavy black telephones, or the old bowling balls, that's a phenolic resin. That's a man-made petroleum-based chemical that is at room temperature a very, very hard, what we would now call a plastic. So if you take that and smash it up into dust and you cook the linseed oil at a high enough temperature, the heat will break down some of that resin and it will blend into the oil and you can make a pretty hard film. So you've got alkyd varnish, you've got urethane varnish. If you use several different urethanes, you can make a polyurethane.
Cool.
So you're fortifying the basic old-fashioned linseed oil with some resin to make a varnish. And if you're trying to do that in a waterborne system, you got a whole bunch of other different technology. But for most cases, the stuff that Bob's using, the Waterlocks or the Watco or Tried and True, those are still linseed oil. There's certain kind of resin. They don't tell you what it is, whether it's single or blend. And usually it's a relatively inexpensive solvent like mineral spirits, which is a blend. So they don't tell you what's in the can. But it's really all the same basic chemistry. There's no real difference between wiping varnish and Danish oil. It's the same stuff.
Just a higher percentage of resin, basically.
Right.
It always amazes me that, you think about the origin of these things. And, you think about shellac, which is bug excrement on a tree.
It is.
It's not
some guy walking along.
It's not excrement.
Well, it's
as my friend Don Williams would say, it's exudate. How do you like that word, Mike?
It's so the
bug
bug
spit.
They lay eggs on a branch,
and it's a cocoon thing. It's a spit,
and they secrete.
Yeah.
This stuff to protect the eggs.
Right. It's not poop, Bob.
It's
okay.
Not, yes.
No, I didn't know that.
It's not
okay.
poop.
All right.
Okay.
So, but some guy walking along sees
got
all
sticky
this.
fingers.
He sees all this stuff up on a tree.
Yep.
And he's looking at it, going, that would look killer on a Queen Anne highboy. It just amazes me.
Uh-huh.
Or the pine sap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take some of that and melt it down and put it on a piece of furniture.
Well,
let's distill some of that and make turpentine.
Yeah.
I imagine someone collecting branches from this tree with this on it. They throw it in the campfire,
Oh, it burned really good.
and all this goopy stuff came out.
Yeah.
So
It's amazing.
From Shop Talk Live 176 in 2018, here is Mike Pekovich dodging a question at his best.
Well, I was wondering, this is something I was thinking about on my drive here today. If you could only use 2 joints, you were limited to 2 joints for the rest of your woodworking life, what would they be? You can't build with any other joints other than these 2.
My question is, does a domino count separately from mortise, like floating mortise and tenon?
It's a what?
Let's.
So you go domino,
I'd go domino and dovetails.
domino and dovetails.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with dado and rabbit because that really defines everything. Because a tenon is just a stick with a rabbit on 4 edges on the end.
Oh,
The mortise is
a loophole.
The mortise is a stop dado. I'm gonna lump groove and dado into the same thing though.
yeah.
That's
Because it is.
It is.
Because anytime somebody corrects somebody for saying groove or dado, it's
yeah, you
kind
want
of a
to
jerk move.
slap them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not talking about anybody specifically who may or may not comment on videos
Yeah.
or anything.
I think I could even get a dovetail as a type of
No.
dado on
No.
the end of a board.
No.
With an angled wall.
No.
Sure.
No.
But this is it forever. You're going to
No,
have
but
to
Mike
adapt
is
this.
trying to find a loophole in which a rabbit or a dado
It's a basic
can
component of
encompass
everything.
any form of joinery.
No.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
Like a raised
it
panel,
now.
that's just like an angled rabbit on the edges of a panel.
No.
Yeah,
It has to be
you're off on
straight
this
up
one.
domino, and what was your other one?
A domino and dovetails.
Domino and dovetails.
What about you? You answer the question legitimately.
I spent about an hour thinking about this on the way here. It's not the most practical, but I would go miters, and bridle joint. The bridle joint is my favorite joint
That bridal
ever.
joint is an underused, awesome joint.
I agree.
That's just a rabbit and dado.
Okay, so let's say we limit it to mortise and tenon and actual answers out of you.
That's a dumb question then.
Well, you can't commute to work with me then. I don't know what to say to that.
I don't think it's a reasonable request.
Well,
It's
every
hypothetical.
hypothetical in the world is unreasonable.
Okay, is a mortise and tenon, is that one joint?
Yes.
Oh, dovetail, mortise, and tenon.
Oh, that was the problem.
Because a rabbit is just like a partial tenon, like a single wall tenon, so I can get my rabbits in there too. And a
Oh,
mortise
you're still
is just
working
a
this
groove and a
angle.
dado, so I can just work backwards from that.
But when you think of a mortise and tenon, that's not what you're thinking
He's
of.
wily.
A little bit.
I'm trying to think of what. Yeah, but like, what about a hole? What about a stick in a hole? How
Well,
is
then you
that?
would say a dowel.
No.
'Cause you could
Stick in
get-
a hole is a mortise and tenon. It's just round.
Oh, okay, so it's a round mortise and tenon,
Yeah.
still a mortise and tenon.
Yeah.
I'm set. Yeah, I'm good.
That's that.
And a finger joint is just a
box
dovetail
mentality.
joint with straight walls.
A finger joint is just a mess of
on.
bridal joints.
Yes.
That's true.
My next article is make this project using one joint.
But really, you're using 25 joints.
Yes, and it'll be the rabbit, but like that'll be everything.
Oh, shoot.
Have a perfectly opposing rabbit on the other side of this and have it. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
Often requested in these emails was anything with Vic Teslin. Vic is a fan favorite, obviously, and he's a favorite of mine as well. From Shop Talk Live 213, here's Vic and Mike discussing lumber selection.
Question number 2 is from Dennis. Do you have any tips for the lumberyard to help single out troubled boards? Quarter sawn white oak is not cheap to just throw away, and our winters in Southern California are not cold enough to burn 14 board foot. So he had a whole bunch of he's building, I believe, your tool cabinet, Mike,
Mhm.
and he had a bunch of wood go wonky on him, basically. Um, I don't have much to offer him because normally you are there with me at the lumberyard.
So that's what you need. You need to
You
get
need a
Mike
pet
Vukovich to come to you. You need to have him come to your lumber yard and pick your wood out with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vic, what are you looking for? I think the answer is probably going to be pretty consistent.
Yeah, I mean, you got to just, and it's almost hard to perceive, but I mean, it comes from, picking out a lot of boards and seeing what's going to cause problems. But you can actually see if a board is going to cause you any grief, like if it has any weird sort of wows in them or whatever. I don't often. Well, I mean, anywhere that I shop for wood, they don't care if I pick apart the pile as long as I put it back. But so, I mean, I'm just looking for the straightest grain, especially in the case of like a quarter sawn white oak. I don't want it running out. I don't want the grain making any like funny jogs along the lines, because as soon as you see that, you know that that's stress that the tree kind of grew under. And as soon as you, like, if it's a piece of 8/4 and you bust that open for a couple of 1-inch pieces, it's going to go crazy on you. The other thing actually has less to do with picking and more to do with handling. And I think that, if depending on the lumber yard, different moisture contents, different lumber yards are going to have things, whether it's stored inside or outside. If you take something that was stored outside, bring it into your shop, crack it open, like right then and there, I mean, you're just begging for it. You're begging for problems. So, the whole, acclimating the wood to your shop environment and bringing it in there slowly, depending on how things go. I mean, a moisture meter is a great thing to have. I mean, they could be a little bit dear if you get the ones that don't have the pins on them, the sort of the ones that use magic. Well, I mean, I don't understand how it works. So that's magic.
I'll never know.
Yeah. So, but I think that's what it is. I mean, I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, exactly. It's I think grain is everything. And you're right. If you find a little potato chip board, if it's already wonky, you're never going to get that flat, because as you try to flatten it, it's just going to keep on moving. And then it's grain, like you said, the grain in relation to the edges of the board, because if you're cutting a straight board out of a crooked tree in that grain, there's a lot of run out. It's going to be a mess when you start to mill that. So super straight grain. On plain sawn boards where you have the cathedrals on the face, if you have a really pronounced cathedral, it means the grain is running at a pretty strong angle in relation to the face of the board. So don't pull anything with really heavy cathedrals. What I'm looking for, like the ideal plain sawn board, is where the grain is pretty straight on the edges, but also down that center strip where it's super plain sawn, is if it's fairly straight or you see these little circles or islands going down, that means that grain is really, really parallel to that surface. That's a really good indicator that was a straight board cut out of a straight tree, and that's going to behave pretty well for you. And like Vic said, if you're ripping down thick stock 8/4 stock into thinner boards and it's been commercially kiln dried, you're going to have to anticipate there's going to be some movement when you do that, and just, account for a lot more material loss than you think you might have. You cannot rip a 2-inch wide board in half and get 2 1-inch wide pieces. I mean, you're actually lucky if you can get 2, full 3/4 inch boards. So out of 2-inch, just if you really account for a lot of loss, then things are going to end up pretty straight. And if you're really trying to sneak as much yield as you can, it's going to bite you. It's going to go crooked, and you're going to lose a lot more wood trying to increase the yield than just being a little bit more conservative with it. So,
Are there any species that you worry about more than others? Like a long time ago, I was doing something and I wanted really, really pale wood. And I found a piece in the poplar pile, it was a piece of like pure sapwood that was just white as can be. And I grabbed it, and I mean, I've never had anything move as much as this board did. It was a haunted board. So I always like when I'm looking at poplar now, I keep sapwood away from it, you know. But are there any things that you're hesitant to buy because of movement?
I don't avoid anything personally. I think that some woods are more prone to movement. Like I find sugar maple, Acer saccharin. I find it can be a little bit unpredictable. But again, I think it has more to, like Mike was suggesting, it has more to do with paying attention to the grain and what it's doing. But I don't know. Do you have any species, Mike, that you avoid?
Ben, you mentioned poplar, and it's super cheap. And I've had, those boards really turn into bananas really quick. So I did a kitchen where I did poplar door frames, and they tended up not staying all that flat. So I would, on something like that, I would go with like a soft maple. I think that can be more stable. Also has to do with how the lumber is dried. Like white oak, I think can be really reactive when you're sawing it, because I think it's one of those woods that you really should dry for a really long time and dry it slowly. But I think they fast track it, and it really creates a lot of internal tensions. Where I was working with some air dried walnut, which was like, 12 quarter stock, and I was ripping 1/8 inch, like basically veneers off of that for some internal dividers, and it was just dead flat. And you could just feel when it fell off, that little thing, that veneer fell off the side of the bandsaw, it just fell over. There's no tension. But if you're trying to, if you're resawing 8 quarter oak, you're probably over 2 feet and you're cutting a 1/2 inch wide board, you can get anywhere from an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch cup there. And if you're trying to flatten that out, you're ending up with not a lot of stock left. So,
So that's a really good point. Do as many short resaws as possible.
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb is always, when you're milling stock, is always break it down as small as you can before you do any final milling to it. Like,
Okay.
if you're getting door frames, 2-inch wide door frames, you don't want to mill up a 10-inch wide board flat and square and then trying to rip your door frames out of it. It never works.
Yeah.
I mean, just cut them, 2 1/4, 2.5 inch wide off of the rough stock and mill down each length of frame as much as you can. And if you can get by leaving it longer before cutting it into shorter lengths, that's okay. But if you do want to get rid of a lot of, cup along the length, if you can cut those parts down, as maybe leave them an inch over length before you start flattening and reduce as much of the cup as you can, you're going to save more lumber that way. If you love this podcast, you'll love Fine Woodworking Unlimited. Access more than 40 years of articles, how-to videos, and project plans designed to take your craft to the next level. Check it out.
Again, thank you so much to everyone who sent in an email with your favorite segments. This episode couldn't have been possible without you. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer on the show, please send them into shoptalk@taunton.com and smash that old thumbs up button on the YouTubes. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thank you for listening.